This class is Systems Approach to Targeting and a continuation of the How a Corps Fights presentation from Exercise 4 Academics. It will discuss some of the considerations and highlight relevant doctrine for thinking about the enemy as a system and how the Corps conducts targeting to support its objectives. It is less of a detailed how-to, but the presentation was built to prompt you to go into the doctrine and expand your understanding of targeting the enemy as a system. I challenge all of you to think about how your AMSP coursework relates as you listen to this presentation. The underlying logic should be apparent as we continue our journey to uncover the mysteries of doctrine. Here's our agenda. We'll briefly discuss references and objectives, talk about core functions in large-scale combat operations, targeting, thinking about the enemy as a system, the process of targeting, integrating fires with MDMP, the role of the planner, the core fight, and finally, we'll briefly discuss the follow-on PE that you'll participate in your seminars. Here's a brief list of references. This is by no means complete. There's certainly quite a few references, both joint Army and sister service doctrine that discuss targeting. I bring your attention to the last two. If you search the Joint Targeting Student Guide, it is a good synopsis for all the existing doctrine on some of the more technical aspects of targeting. I'll note that it may not be current as doctrine changes, but I found it was a useful tool that summarizes existing joint doctrine. Finally, it's worth reiterating, you will not walk away from this class as a fires expert, but you do have some experts amongst you as your fellow students. The most important thing you should take away from this class is how to start to think about targeting the enemy as a system and how it's integrated with the planning process. Our objectives for this class are to provide an overview of the systems approach to targeting from the core perspective broadly. Additionally, we'll prepare for the follow-on PE, and there are two specific ELOs for this class. Evaluate the role of operational fires, facilitating maneuver, isolating the battlefield, and destroying critical adversary functions and facilities, and to analyze the enemy system to identify critical capabilities, critical requirements, and critical vulnerabilities to support targeting decisions. These all won't be achieved during this presentation, but they should by the end of your PE and your seminars. Corps Fires and LISCO is integrated into the existing planning process. There are some processes that have been developed over time to better synchronize the effects of fires that may be unfamiliar to some of you. But fundamentally, fires are synchronized with the other warfighting functions through the planning process. These visual depictions of the decide, detect, deliver, and assess, or D3A methodology come from doctrine and show us where synchronization activities happen during the planning steps of MDMP. You can specifically note on the slides that these come from ATP 3 Tech 60, both of these. While this is useful, as a planner, you need to first consider the functions of the Corps as it relates to fires. As we consider how fires integrates across the warfighting functions and Corps operations, it is important to visualize the battle space. Here's two visual depictions of the battle space, both from FM 3 Tech 94, offering different ways in which you can visualize the battle space in addition to those that you saw in the previous class. Consider the space as we briefly overview the core functions in large-scale combat operations. Start to think about how you would employ fires to support these functions. Again, from FM 3 Tech 94, the core functions in large-scale combat operations include conducting shaping operations within the Corps' AO, task organizing and employing divisions and brigades, integrating and synchronizing operations of divisions and brigades, massing effects at decisive points across and within multiple domains, and allocating resources and setting priorities, and finally employing joint capabilities. Expanding this list to more detailed considerations relating to fires to the functions of the Corps, conducting operations within the Corps AO. Operations in the Corps' deep area involve efforts to prevent uncommitted enemy forces from being committed in a coherent manner. The Corps' deep area generally extends beyond division boundaries out to the limits of the Corps' designated AO. You can see that depicted here in the graphic, generally speaking, in terms of the boundaries between the Corps and the division. The purpose of operations in the deep area is often tied to setting conditions for future events in time and space. Operations in the deep area might disrupt the movement of operational reserve, prevent enemy fires from employing long-range fires, or neutralize a portion of enemy integrated air defenses. Notice I said a portion of the integrated enemy air defense. Based on resources and capabilities, it may not be possible or necessary to eliminate the entire network, but you must determine which part is necessary in time and space and relative to friendly objectives. Task organizing and employing divisions and brigades. The Corps will task organize fire support assets to maximize their effects across the entire battle space. This, of course, does not mean they will always allocate them to subordinate units, but they need to be integrated how they can best achieve their objectives during planning. Integrating and synchronizing operations of divisions and brigades. The Corps integrates and synchronizes the operations of its divisions in depth so that their timing multiplies their effectiveness across multiple domains throughout the Corps' AO. The timing could be simultaneous or sequenced in a way to maneuver friendly forces or compel the enemy forces to move. A primary objective is to prevent the enemy from employing its forces in a coherent way. Massing effects at decisive points across and within multiple domains. A Corps achieves mass by concentrating the effects of its combat power at the most advantageous places and times to produce decisive results. Massing is enabled by the other functions of the Corps in large-scale combat operations. The Corps shapes the deep area and maneuvers its task-organized subordinate formations into positions of advantage to enable the concentration of effects to achieve the most decisive results. Allocating resources and setting priorities. A Corps uses management techniques to ensure it has the resources to shape the deep area and that its subordinate divisions and brigades have the necessary resources to win in their assigned missions. Employing joint capabilities. Joint capabilities enhance the Corps' ability to conduct shaping operations, provide additional combat power effects to concentrate, and provide additional logistic services to aid in resource distribution. Now that we've briefly discussed Corps fires and large-scale combat operations and visually depicted battle space considerations, let's briefly introduce systems and how to think about the enemy as a system with our purpose to achieve greater effects while targeting. Think about your experience during the design systems thinking, great powers perspective, or the integrated planning exercise. You developed a greater ability to think about problems by thinking about the components of the systems that make them up. Good targeting is about scaling this down to the level where you can apply resources to accomplish objectives. JP2 TAC 01.3, which is the Joint Intelligence Preparation of the Operating Environment, which is where all three of these graphics on this slide are derived, says that the understanding of systems allows commanders and staff to consider a broader set of options to focus limited resources, create desired effects, and achieve objectives. Further refining this to things that can be targeted and best contribute to friendly objectives allows us to influence the components of the system in a way that creates a temporal advantage. This is a narrative of the enemy as a system. IPB, or intelligence preparation of the battle space, and design inform our understanding of the adversary and the environment. The targets we choose should always be based off our determined objectives. Too often we think of targeting as a checklist. We think of targeting tanks, IADs, etc. These assets may require targeting, but this should come from a logical thinking about the enemy system and identifying those enemy capabilities that need to be targeted in time and space relative to the friendly scheme of maneuver. Let me reiterate that it has to be relative to our scheme of maneuver and not just targeting for the sake of eliminating enemy. From this, we begin to understand how we can better create advantage with our capabilities against the enemy in order to achieve our objectives. Thinking about the enemy as a system allows staffs to leverage the knowledge to strike at decisive points along the critical path to achieve the greatest effect at the appropriate time. Fires is a complementary warfighting function that leverages one of the tools we have at the Corps to contribute to accomplishing our purpose. Here are some more specific ways to think about targeting in the context of the joint targeting cycle. The upper left, which is the joint targeting cycle, notice it begins with the end state and objectives. All other aspects of targeting come from this starting point. Lower left is a visual depiction of the target development relationships. During planning, we systematically examine the enemy using the targeting taxonomy, which leads to a hierarchical ordering of the adversary, its capabilities, and helps identify target elements. This diagram depicts a framework to help us think about the relationship of planning to targeting products while considering the enemy as a system of parts that can be targeted. In the middle is an example of the identified components and elements of a given target. In this case, it's an integrated air defense network, where it breaks down the air defense network into the systems and then the airfields and the associated components of airfields. The right is another example of a potential target that may not be considered a traditional military target, but it illustrates another way to think about target systems of components and elements. In this case, it's an example of petroleum oils and lubricants target system and the components of that system. Let's discuss the process of targeting. From ATP 3 TAC 60, specifically page 1, TAC 6 and 7, is the D3A and the targeting in MDMP. The Corps doesn't have the time or the capability of taking out every enemy system on the battlefield. Approaching what should be targeted in a disciplined process that assesses what needs to be targeted and when, in order to manage the tempo of the battle and enable subordinate units to accomplish their assigned objectives. The Corps integrates, among many capabilities, cyber and electromagnetic activities, or CEMA, joint and national assets, long-range precision fires, and attack aviation in a way that leverages the unique capabilities of each in synchronization with their understanding of the events happening in the battle space. Commander's guidance for the concept of fires describes the purpose of fires and how they will be employed, reflecting this synchronization. The 6 phases of joint targeting, which we previously looked at, specifically on page 2 TAC 4 of JP3 TAC 60, are illustrative here. The end state, target development and prioritization, capabilities, analysis, commander's decisions and force assignments, mission planning, force execution, and assessments. This all starts with the end state and objectives and reflects the commander's guidance for fires and the concept of fires in the process. The systems approach to targeting is a cognitive approach supported by detailed planning. Once objectives are identified and synchronized through the planning process and approved by the commander, they then enter this more detailed process of targeting, whether that be the joint targeting cycle or through the Corps as a JTF. Targeting is a complex activity which has many aspects. Our focus is to think about targeting enemy systems. Similar to the idea that many of us are familiar with in center of gravity analysis, planners look for aspects of the enemy system that may be vulnerable or offer disproportionate advantage to our forces if eliminated or mitigated during a certain time relative to friendly action. In all cases, planners must consider forces available, capabilities required, and risk incurred with trying to target a certain aspect of the enemy system. The connectivity of the planning tools that are described in this diagram, specifically here, are as follows. Broadly, I want to describe how they're related to the fires products and how they are synchronized to effectively target the enemy system. The high value target, which is determined during IPB, we'll expand on this in a second. The high payoff target list, which is derived from the HPT list and relative to the adversary scheme maneuver, the attack guidance matrix, the decision support template and matrix, and decision points, and then the collections matrix we'll discuss briefly. High value targets are those assets the enemy commander requires for the successful completion of their mission, identified during IPB and refined during MDMP. The high payoff target list addresses the priority for target and the attack of those targets, deconflicts competing demands. This is relative to the scheme maneuver used by friendly forces. The attack guidance matrix is a prioritized list which designates targets will be attacked, defining when, how, and describing the desired effects. The decision support template, which we've all used before, is essentially a combined intelligence estimate and operations estimate in a graphic form. It relates the detail contained on the event template prepared during JIPO Step 4 or during IPB Step 4 to the times and locations of critical areas, events, and activities that would necessitate a command decision, such as shifting the location of the main effort or redeploying forces. Although the DST does not dictate decisions to the Joint Force Commander, it is a useful tool for indicating to the staff points in time and space that may potentially become decision points where action by the Joint Force Commander may be required. Ultimately, these may become CCIRs. The decision support template is constructed by combining the event template with data developed during the war game. Decision points identified during planning that support targeting may become CCIRs depending on the scheme maneuver. For example, will the enemy commit the reserve against the 2nd Division in Phase 3? If it is determined that this is happening, then the determination would be made to target with HIMARS or pre-planned attack aviation to negate the effects of the adversary. The decision support matrix is a combined intel and ops product refined during wargaming. The decision support template is essentially a combined intelligence estimate and operations estimate in graphic form. It relates the detail contained on the event template to the times and locations of critical areas, events, and activities that would necessitate a command decision, as previously addressed, such as shifting the location of the main effort or redeploying forces. The attack guidance matrix includes at a minimum a specific HPT, timing of the engagement, how the target is engaged, the desired effects, and in remarks to include any restrictions associated with that target. And finally, the collections matrix indicates how the information about targets will be collected. Next, we'll visually depict the military decision-making process with the D3A process and when those specific targeting activities occur during MDMP. These are the critical staff inputs into the targeting process that show which inputs have the greatest impact to planning for each step of MDMP. If the staff is not synchronized and they're planning independently, and it shows, and it's normally evident after products are developed and always clear during execution. At warfighter exercises, the common after-action comment is that this lack of synchronization becomes evident during the deliver phase when the targeting cycle for the exercise normally begins. The role of the planner as it relates to fires is much the same as it is throughout the entire planning process. The planner must apply the operational art. They must ensure the understanding, the priorities, the guidance, the right people at the right meetings to develop the greatest level of integration. They must discipline the process through the battle rhythm and use the assessments to update the plan. Through the lens of the 10 elements of operational art, planners can consider how each, alone or integrated, may be important in time and space to accomplish the Army's operating concept of unified land operations. This slide should be familiar from the How a Corps Fights brief. I want to use the same slide with a few minor additions just related to fires to talk through a few fires related aspects associated with battle space planning. We previously emphasized the importance of understanding the battle space, ultimately to be able to determine what systems are available and how you can target those systems in the Corps' battle space. And before I close, I have to mention one important control measure that commonly shapes how the Corps thinks about fire support planning in its battle space. In this case, it's the Fire Support Coordination Line, commonly referred to in the Army as the FISL. If you're in another service, you may just call it the FSCL, but in joint doctrine, it has the same definition. The FISL facilitates the expeditious attack of service targets of opportunity beyond the coordinating measure. So in this case, the FISL indicators are beyond the FISL, also depicting the Corps' deep area. The FISL applies to all fires of air, land, and sea-based weapon systems using any type of ammunition. The placement of the FISL is a key consideration for deconflicting operations in the deep area. It supports common objectives within the AO, beyond which all fires must be coordinated with active commanders prior to engagement. Short of the line, all fires must be coordinated with the establishing commander prior to engagement. The Corps coordinates for and controls fires in the area between the FLOT, or the forward line of troops, and the Fire Support Coordination Line. Beyond the FISL, again, the Corps nominates targets to the land component commander and coordinates for joint interdiction of those targets. Additionally, it is important to note that the responsibility for the fight can only be defined by the boundaries established. In this case, the linear lines, parallel lines, indicate the left and right boundaries. Forward in time and space boundaries are important to consider as well. Effective use of three-dimensional boundaries not depicted on this slide, such as aviation control measures, must be considered for the most effective use of fires. We understand as a staff that we use control measures, both permissive and restrictive, both with specific definitions and doctrine, in order to allow assets to be used in a timely and accurate manner. In closing, core fires must reflect an understanding of the friendly and enemy systems and synchronize the effective targeting in time and space to enable success for subordinate units. This must be done across the battle space in 3 dimensions and in all domains. Just as important, planners must ensure the staff shares this understanding. The cognitive process of identifying and targeting the enemy as a system enhances all core functions, which are shaping actions, task organization decisions, integrating and synchronizing operations, matching effects on decisive points, allocating resources, and setting priorities, and employing joint capabilities. Planners and staff understanding of the enemy system and selecting targets that create the greatest advantage will best accomplish the commander's objectives. This starts with an understanding of the enemy system and is achieved through integrated and synchronized planning. Your seminar leaders will provide you specific guidance for the practical exercise associated with this period of instruction. At a minimum, the outputs from that exercise will be the high value target list, the high payoff target list, TAC guidance matrix, decision support template and matrix, and decision points related to targeting and collections necessary to support targeting. This will provide you with an opportunity to collect useful planning products, review the doctrine, and discuss inside of your OPT how your group will approach targeting the enemy as a system and integrate it into the planning process. And it will allow you to continue to think about the capabilities and resources that you have at your disposal as a core staff, as well as the capabilities of the enemy force using the existing exercise 4 scenario.